Podcast 180, Adapting to Changing Legislation in Cultural Practices, ISBN 978-976-972-6727. During my academic tenure at New Jersey City University, I served as a member of the Judicial Committee. But I am not a lawyer, legislator, or elected legislature. However, I am an author, cultural theoretician, doctoral student, licensed cultural practitioner, media arts major, and publisher who understand the importance of adapting to changing legislation or addition to the terms of a contract, law, government, regulatory filing, or other documents according to Investopedia.com. I understand that process and structure are generally distinct entities in political science according to juststore.org. These concepts are generally considered distinct entities as per juststore.org. In my view as a doctoral student, the paradoxical nature of legislation, the importance of understanding popular and learned culture, antiquity, and social spaces has fueled my intellectual passions in analyzing problem solving and commitment to learning beyond the classroom. In the scheme of things, I also acknowledge that students and myself share some commonalities because we study process according to juststore.org, which is adopted as a contemporary approach in understanding the significance of adapting to evolving legislation in cultural practices, simultaneously citing Wikipedia's view that legislation is a crucial government function according to en.wikipedia.org. Adapting to changing legislation in cultural practices examines the potential effects of inadequate legislation on due diligence and on ethical practices. I must caution that the terms adapted and change have Celtic origins, meaning alteration or change, and have evolved from substituting to changing, and bartering became a practice according to www.etymology.com. Therefore, in this context, when practice is achieved and when an action becomes habitual due to its repetition and consistency, transforming it from an intention into a regular habit, it becomes a cultural practice, and therefore the same is characterized as the manifestation of a culture or subculture according to en.wikipedia.org. Adaptation to changing legislation and cultural practices appears to resemble acculturation according to en.wikipedia.org. Through a cultural theoretician lens, acculturation is the process of an individual adapting to a new cultural environment due to being placed in a new culture, which has become my dissertation. This thesis explores the intricate relationship existing between legislation and culture, its impact on practices, preservation of traditions, promotion of cultural diversity, and the influence of artifacts on modern culture. Research has suggested that although this topic is a theoretical construct, yet it is rooted in the idea that culture connects individuals, according to medium.com, with actions, while law, according to michaelpage.com, specialized and handled by lawyers, is crucial for territorial interests, and clear communication is essential. Legislation and regulation, according to tanfonline.com, are distinct concepts that maintain a clear division of labor, with legislation outlining public policy principles and regulation implementing these principles. However, in this context, legislation is employed as an abstract concept explaining the behavior of regulatory authorities and private players, translating legislative requirements into actual compliant practices, according to tanfonline.com. Historically, adaptability refers to a person's capacity to adapt to changes in their environment, which directly impacts their flexibility, according to your.yale.edu. Adapting to changes in legislation in cultural practices is nothing new under the sun, because the 12 tables enacted 451 to 450 BCE was the earliest significant legislation aimed at establishing a written public code that patrician magistrates could not alter, according to Britannica.com. Ancient Greece used legislation involving the assembly to establish laws which were debated and passed by the assembly, becoming part of the legal system, according to study.com. Legislative assembly refers to a legislature or its house in some countries, including Commonwealth of Nations, member states, and other nations, according to en.wikipedia.org. The Roman public was ruled by patricians, who held the highest government positions, with a senate elected by these patricians, and lower class citizens had minimal influence, according to ushistory.org. Congress holds all legislative power in the government, allowing it to create new laws or modify existing ones, according to whitehouse.gov. Parliament is the primary law-making body, able to override common law or judge-made rules, while the Constitution serves as the supreme law, requiring both common law and legislation to align, according to caribbean.unwomen.org. The EU, on the other hand, has exclusive competencies in certain areas, known as the Customs Union, where member countries can only apply the law unless authorized by EU, according to commission.europa.edu. As a result of my analysis and research, I decided to advance the notion that legislation is significantly influenced because of cultural values. Understanding antiquity's origins, traditions of philosophy, morality, and ethics rooted in ancient Greek, Roman, and medieval Christian philosophies is the foundation for cultural heritage preservation, according to interpol.int. This nuance is a philosophical concept, according to study.com, that can influence cultural change through diffusion, a phenomenon increasingly prevalent in today's global society due to communication, travel, and the internet. Compliance in this context has to do with referring to the obligation to adhere to a specific rule, law, or agreement, and fosters transparency and trust within and outside an organization, promoting a culture of transparency, according to linkedin.com. Staying informed about cultural legislative changes is crucial according to planetcompliance.com. One of the ways that this can be done is to effectively communicate and anticipate legislative changes that may affect citizens' communication and requirements, preparing them to adapt to regulatory updates in their way of life. After I analyzed the paradoxical legislation, popular culture, antiquity, and social spaces, emphasizing the importance of understanding difference and subordination in the social work as a cultural theoretician, I discovered that there is no complete solution exists due to their nature. Navigating this stimulating topic, it offered valuable insights into cultural artifacts and influences modern culture and legal culture as the cultural background of law encompassing its role in society, legal sources, and the authority of various actors and institutions according to scholarship.law.duke.edu. It should be noted that legal culture, as defined by Friedman, refers to the network of values and attitudes surrounding law influencing people's inclination towards or disinterest in law or government, according to en.wikipedia.org. While progress has been hindered by natural enemies, ignorance, superstition, conquest, ease, power, and food cravings throughout history, according to acton.org. I have discovered that cultural expressions is another component of this discourse, since they are protected through law, including traditional constitutions and regulations, with governmental agencies managing these protections to ensure their preservation and preservation, according to builtheritage.springeropen.com. For instance, the Copyright Act in India only safeguards tangible traditional cultural expressions like recordings or written documents, including oral traditions and intangible forms, according to legalserviceindia.com. Historically, within these precincts, global heritage laws dating back to the late 17th century, Europe ensured preservation. By the late 19th century, Greece recognized antiquities as state property. Italy reorganized heritage management, and France preserved architecture. The 1882 Ancient Monuments Protection Act was influential. International heritage treaties began with the Hague Conventions addressing cultural heritage protection during war. During World Wars, countries updated their legislation with Second World War devastation causing further changes, according to builtheritage.springeropen.com. The world of work is being shaped by socio-political, ethical, and cultural factors, leading to new laws such as Portugal's right to disconnect, France, Italy, Spain, and Ontario in Canada. The 1973 Roe v. Wade decision has increased support for abortion rights, with companies offering travel expenses for female employees. The European Union has ruled that companies must have 40% female boardroom quotas. Germany has introduced the right to work from home, and Ireland is set to introduce remote working legislation, according to worklife.news. Ultimately, cultural conflicts often arise in legal disputes, particularly regarding state power, non-discrimination, and positive state obligations involving different cultural standards, according to soar.info. To give you an idea, in Kenya, Nairobi, July 7, 2022, 25% of all countries still have discriminatory nationality laws denying women equal rights to men, posing human rights violations. Women are prohibited from transferring their citizenship to their children and foreign spouses and face restrictions on changing or retaining their nationality post-marriage. Campaigners urged governments to dismantle these laws and ensure full legal equality, according to equalitynow.org. Adapting to changing legislation in cultural practices is very applicable because a cultural norm can be changed with a law because after the Ottoman Empire was overthrown, Kemal Atatürk, the founder of modern Turkey, banned Muslim dress and required that Turkish be henceforth written in the Roman alphabet, according to Quora.com. Profile Ernest W. Adams. In this environment, it should be noted that the leading legal reformers include a secular constitution, a secular civil code based on the Swiss Civil Code, and a penal code based on Italy 1924-37, according to en.wikipedia.org. Cultural priorities significantly influence the laws of a country, according to homework.study.com. Culture including language, religion, food, music, art, fashion, family, structure, gender roles, and social norms, according to brilliantino.com. Historical, geographical, and familial factors combined significantly influence the assessment and the intervention processes, according to dhs.state.mn.us. Interacting with cultural heritage laws emerging globally with ancient kingdoms and religious sites protected by Greek and Roman rulers, Islamic caliphates, and Imperial China. Contemporary heritage law roots can be traced back to late 17th century Europe, according to builtheritage.springeropen.com. An antique, a 100-year-old artifact from the Middle Ages, according to Quora.com, can be seen and interpreted as adapting to changing legislation in cultural practices, leading to a rethinking of legislation. Moreover, the distinction between discursive formations and non-discursive systems focusing on practices and discourse suggests that it was very plausible that the absence of legislation may hinder due diligence and unethical practices, necessitating the institutionalization of laws to regulate citizen behavior. This scholarly critique, adapting to changing legislation in cultural practices, examines the potential effects of inadequate legislation on due diligence and unethical practices, which captures and frames legislation through the lenses of an author, cultural theoretician, licensed cultural practitioner, media arts major, and doctoral student as a combination of a process and a product reflecting theoretical assumptions and a skill, according to tanfuline.com. In cases where legislation or custom cannot provide a specific rule, courts must proceed equitably, relying on justice, reason, and prevailing usages. Legislation and culture are rooted in the coexistence of individuals within a community, according to www.bu.edu. Is presented in 10 chapters, 18,706 words, and aired in podcast 180 and published in publication 320.